Hello everybody, this is Jason, the curator of comics, here with the first ever edition of CCN News, Comics Corners News. We are going to be talking about a couple different stories here from a couple of different sources. We're going to start with a few stories from CBR, or comicbookresources.com, and these will be just some of the more recent weekly headlines for the record. These are not all of the weekly headlines. These are just going to be a small handful selection. Without further ado, let us dig in. So we'll start with more than 3 decades after its theatrical release, the beloved time travel comedy Back to the Future, which is my personal favorite movie of all time, especially part 1, is getting a manga adaptation from One Punch Man artist Yosuke Murata. I hope I pronounced that correctly. The Back to the Future manga will be serialized on the Kona Manga ga Sugoi website before the manga will be collected in its first volume, set for a April 20th release this year. In DC news, the biggest wedding of the DC universe since Superman and Lois Lane in 1996 will take place in Batman issue 50. That is Batman issue 50 of the Rebirth line, for those of you keeping score at home. And it will be Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman. I'm of two minds of this because, well, in all honesty, while I feel that Catwoman is probably one of the better romantic matches for Batman on the whole, I honestly really don't see the point of this, when in reality it's going to probably end with somebody either dying or the ceremony getting interrupted, because Batman's marriages, well, they just never end well, just much like his relationships. Anyways, issue 50 is going to be set to come out on Wednesday, July the 4th of July, and because it's a superhero wedding, it probably won't go according to plan, like I said. It has already been confirmed that the Joker will be getting wind of the couple's wedding before they walk down the aisle, and that just makes it, well, interesting to say the least. It'll be revealed in a DC Nation one-shot, a very small story written by Tom King. Will basically reveal how the Joker finds out about the wedding and how he reacts to their marriage. So yeah, my feelings are that the Joker will probably end up taking the wedding hostage or disrupt it, and then Catwoman, maybe she'll realize that she can't, date Bruce because, well, if this is going to happen on their wedding day, they can't be together. Although they did technically get married in the Earth 2 continuity, and they have a daughter named the Huntress. That was where the Huntress character came from, so little known fact for you fans. And the last story from CBR, writer Brian Michael Bendis is going to be taking the reins from Superman in a very big way. He's not only going to be taking over almost all the Superman titles, but he will introduce a new villain to the franchise with ties to Krypton. I'm not sure how I feel about that, because General Zod's already a really good villain from Krypton, and then you've got all the other various elements that are kind of tied to Krypton, like Brainiac is technically tied to Krypton, very loosely, and all that other stuff. And then you've also got, Kara, aka Supergirl. So, there's a lot of stuff that's still technically tied to Krypton, so I don't really know how I feel about this. My only hope is that if it doesn't undo any of Jeff Johns' excellent Superman run, because he actually kind of revitalized a lot of Superman's work, or a lot of Superman's stuff in the mid-2000s, in my opinion. But anyways, his 10-page debut for Brian Michael Bendis will be the 1000th issue of Action Comics, which is just amazing to think that no other comic in history, the only other comic that has come close to that has been Detective Comics, also run by DC. So that's going to be amazing. There's going to be a Man of Steel 6-issue miniseries, which will also be written by Bendis, penned by Bendis. And then the weekly Man of Steel miniseries will feature art by the likes of Ivan Reyes, Evan Doc Shaner, Ryan Sook, Kevin Maguire, Adam Hughes, and Jason Fabok. I don't know how that is pronounced, so forgive me for those of you who are fans of his art. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see where this all goes. The other set of news stories that we are going to be talking about today come courtesy of Newsarama, but first I would like to make a passing mention of the other major news that did occur this week about Stan Lee being rushed to the hospital. Stan Lee, despite his valiant efforts at 95, was unable to attend Wizard World St. Louis like he had planned. He planned to keep his comic convention commitments because he's just that cool of a guy, I guess. But Stan Lee thankfully was released with from the hospital in relatively good shape. From what we could tell, at 95, he's probably just more energetic and spry than most people at that age, rather than him actually maybe being in better shape than most people of that age. But regardless, thoughts and prayers go out to Stan Lee, and hope that he continues to get better. This is his second big health scare over the course of the last year. In fact, I think it's like the second in like 6 months for him. So, Father Time might finally be catching up to the man who, if Jack Kirby's the king, then I'd say Stan Lee is probably the prince of comics, or maybe the baron, some other highly ranking lordly title. Anyways, here's the beginning, or I should say, here's some stuff from Newsarama, Newsarama.com. A self-described fanboy group is getting media attention and censure this week after threatening to sabotage Rotten Tomatoes' score for Black Panther, the Marvel Disney film, which opens Friday, February 16th. The threat came from the Facebook group Down with Disney's Treatment of Franchises and its Fanboys. Haven't heard of this group, but that's I'll get into my thoughts and opinions on that in a second. Rotten Tomatoes released a statement denouncing the group, and Facebook has removed its page, as well as deleting the group's event titled "Give Black Panther a Rotten Audience Score" on Rotten Tomatoes. According to various reports, the members of the group have posted complaints ranging from Marvel's anti-mansplaining message in Star Wars: The Last Jedi, which I have not seen, so I don't know how true this claim is, or whether or not it's being over-exaggerated or not, to the claim that Disney unfairly influenced reviewers against DC cinematic releases. Members were also already discussing a similar attack on Avengers Infinity War, which has not come out and is slated for the summer release. I have to be perfectly honest. When it comes to fans of comic books and their passion for it, I can appreciate that. And I can appreciate, as a fan of comics, even though I actually tend to lean more towards DC than Marvel, I can appreciate Marvel fans getting outraged and upset at what Marvel has done. And Marvel, believe me, if you look at the comics, they have done a lot of, very poor decisions that don't appeal to the core fan base anymore, and they've lost touch with a lot of what's made those core characters great. On the other hand, at the same time, the movies, I've always felt that most of the movies I've watched have been really good. They've told great stories. I mean, with the exception of the Fantastic Four movies, since they really went on this big Marvel Cinematic Universe kick with Iron Man, tying everything in to one big cinematic universe, I've very rarely been disappointed by a Marvel movie that I've seen, and the Marvel movies themselves have very rarely been bad, on the whole. Now, I can understand being upset at Disney because Disney is, the great evil empire, no pun intended. They literally own Star Wars. They own, I guess the list would be much shorter of what Disney in terms of entertainment doesn't own at this point. If you think of a major media brand, Disney technically probably owns it. The name may be their own, but you look at Marvel Comics and Marvel, studios in general, that's owned by Disney. Disney bought out Fox late last year, 20th Century Fox Studios last year. So now they technically own all of that. Even if 20th Century Fox keeps the name and all of its properties, Disney is still the overlord brand that it's tied under, the umbrella that's tied under. So I can understand why people don't like Disney, and I can also understand why, you hate what constantly, produces probably the most quality, or at the very least, the stuff that puts the most money and time into probably producing. I think it's a lot of times we hate high quality and we want, the opportunity to be impressed by something that doesn't have to go out of its way to throw money at a problem. We want something that's competently made, but doesn't necessarily have to break the bank in order to be considered a success. And Black Panther, I think the biggest problem with it is not that, a lot of these fans, don't want the movie to succeed because they're, racist or anything like that. I think it's because maybe they don't know the character. Maybe they just, again, are against Disney and they don't really care about the movie. And I'll be perfectly honest, I can honestly feel that Marvel now with the movie cinematic universe for the first time with like Black Panther, they're pandering a little bit too much with the, the whole race gimmick. Now, don't get me wrong, in the comics, pretty much the whole nation of Wakanda is an African American or black, if you will, nation, because that's how it's portrayed in the comics. So if you want to be true to that, hey, I got no problem with that. But at the same time, I can definitely see where this could be a slippery slope where if Marvel, or I should say Disney, is not careful, they could end up like Marvel Comics and they could turn away everything that's made them successful, much in the same way Marvel has done with its classic timeless stories and the like. So yeah, I mean, I'm interested in seeing Black Panther, but I don't know if it's necessarily going to be the best Marvel movie, the one that everybody's got to see in order to, enjoy it all. I am quite surprised that it's going to be projected for a $400 million box office pre-ticket sales, and that means that it's probably going to do maybe that and a half at the actual box office when the movie's, all said and done there. But I'm honestly not really sure how to feel about this whole thing. I think Rotten Tomatoes, I can respect their decision and, how they want, people to be able to speak their mind critically, but they also don't want, their whole platform to be used as a source to torpedo, films and the like. And I would like to think that people are smart enough to know and acknowledge what's, a critical perception of a movie or any form of media and what is simply just whining and moaning and complaining because you fear that this is the antithesis of everything you want or it's going in a direction that you really don't like. To be perfectly honest, I can also understand the argument of why people are saddened, why they feel that maybe, DC's getting a bad rap, because I can honestly understand that. With the exception of Wonder Woman, how none of the DC films coming out in recent memory have been given positive critical reception. And while I will say that Batman vs. Superman was not nearly as bad as I initially made it out to be, or thought it was going to be, it was still very, very bad for me personally. I didn't really care for Man of Steel. I thought it was okay. I didn't hate it. But I felt that, a lot of the charisma and the acting prowess from the various actors was kind of gone, which that's my opinion. I'm one of the few people who actually legitimately, unironically liked Suicide Squad because it added, a lot of humor and life to the DC universe, even if it was dark and gritty humor. It also had a bit more color, which I think is why a lot of people liked, Wonder Woman to a certain degree. But no, really, the reason I really liked Justice League, honestly, if I'm being perfectly honest, the characterization was great in that movie, and a couple of nitpicks aside, I actually really liked Justice League on the whole as a film. So I can understand why, my voice is just one shout in the dark, and why, a lot of these fans are a little disappointed because they maybe just want an equal playing field, but at the same time, admittedly, DC hasn't given them the quality in films that the Marvel films has, so I don't think you can really contribute this to a conspiracy theory via Disney that they're for some reason making it so that fans don't like these movies and critics don't like these movies. I think DC has a lot to answer for in that regard, and I don't know if it's the script writers, I don't know if it's the visual cinematographers or the directors or who has to answer for that, but somebody does have to answer for that. And as for Facebook censoring them, I really just don't think that that's a smart move in general. I think that Facebook really should realize that, based on the group's name and how they're doing this whole thing, that they're about as harmful to the actual film industry and Marvel, bottom line on the whole, as your average conspiracy theorist might be to, pick your conspiracy theory topic that hasn't gained any, actual tread of, dignity or fact. As a result, I feel that this was kind of just, like a very desperate move by Facebook to kind of appease Disney more than Rotten Tomatoes, because Rotten Tomatoes, again, their whole point of their site is for them to be a public platform like a Metacritic or something along those lines, and offer people just as much critical opinion as, actual cinema critics that get paid to go and watch the movies and dissect. So I think that it's a terrible move on Facebook's part, because I don't think that they're really going to harm anything. Like I said, the ticket pre-sales basically show that they're not going to harm anything, and it's not like they've threatened violence or anything like that against people that don't. They're just calling to action. It's as peaceful a protest of the movies as you can honestly get in this day and age, without them going to a movie theater and blocking the doors to a movie theater and saying that we won't move until you stop showing the film, because that's literally the only other way they could go about probably getting people to stop seeing the film or give them a negative rating for the film. And last but not least, Nickelodeon today revealed the first look of the characters in its brand new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series, Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because that's what we needed, a third reboot of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Actually, this is the second under Nickelodeon, more like the fifth or sixth overall cartoon series, if you count like the stuff from back when WB, Warner Brothers Kids, was a thing. They had a TV series, and then of course there's the classic iconic 1989 series that started it all. And basically it follows the band of brothers, which we already knew they were brothers, as they discover new powers and enter a mystical world they never knew before beneath the streets of New York City. So basically it's the same as every other Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles feature that there has ever been, like ever. It's a 2D animated series too, which, okay, I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest, it doesn't really matter necessarily, because, like they've gone between 2D and 3D for like the last couple series anyways, so it's like, okay, whatever. It debuts later this year on Nickelodeon. It'll be a 26 episode series, which will be co-executive produced by Andy Serrano, the character designer for Samurai Jack, and Ant Ward, supervising provider for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I believe the last series, if not the original one, doesn't state in there, at Nickelodeon Burbank. Rob Paulson, a very, very well-known animation specialist in terms of voice acting, I should say, the Animaniacs automatically springs to mind, will be voice directing the series, and that's actually kind of a bit of an interesting touch. I like that a lot. Now, the big thing that I have in terms of a problem with this is not the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles continuing as a series. I knew after the last series on Nickelodeon ran its course that it would only be a time before, they came back with it, because let's be perfectly honest, after the last couple Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies, both the animated films and the Michael Bay disaster pieces, nobody was going to be clamoring, at least right away, with, like live action for a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie again. So the best way for Nickelodeon, who I believe has the exclusive rights to the television series. Meanwhile, it's IDW. IDW Publishing has exclusive rights to the comics. So at the same time, it kind of makes sense for them to try and keep the property alive, because while they do have, IDW does release, I want to say it's annual or biannuals of the comics, they're not necessarily as prominent as they once were back in the day. A lot of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles stuff comes from television, and that's how a lot of kids know about it. In fact, I think a lot of the more recent generation will be surprised to know that in 1984, almost 35 years ago, the comic was first created, and it was really, a while before such a thing even began to make itself known in television, really, and that's kind of the amazing thing. The other thing that, or I should say the real thing that is going to be the challenge for me personally, is getting over the art style. Now, the art style it almost looks too cartoony, if that makes even any lick of sense, but it does. It looks like they're cardboard cutouts, or just like they're the original characters on steroids. And I know what they're trying to do with the 2D style. They're trying to give them their own unique look, because the Turtles could, in most mediums be swapped out for one another. If, like you took their bandanas off, you wouldn't know who was who if they didn't talk. I get that. But at the same time, it just looks too comically goofy for me. And at the end of the day, the big problem for me personally also, and this isn't even a thing of a race thing at all, is the April O'Neil character once again being a snarky teenager. I don't get what the idea behind April O'Neil being a snarky teenager other than the fact that she is supposed to be, like relatable to the kids because, the turtles are kung fu masters. So, the kids want to be them, want to, be as cool as they are as action heroes, but they can live vicariously through April O'Neil. I don't get it. The problem is, and that's kind of the problem, because you raise a whole lot of red flags with continuity, for one, because it kind of leads you to wonder, okay, does the comics canon then, take this seriously, or do they not take this seriously? What about the previous movies? Do they exist in a different Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles universe? And you may be laughing at that, but it's a legitimate question to ask. And then you got April O'Neil, as a character herself, you've got no consistent tone. I mean, the Turtles across all mediums have had a consistent character setup. Raphael, the brash, braggadocious oftentimes, but also guy who basically never listens and also goes looking for a fight at every single turn. Michelangelo, the party dude. Donatello, the mechanical genius that sometimes is a bit more bumbling than others. Leonardo, the self-confident, sometimes self-righteous, but usually pretty calm and cool and collected leader who's more your average Joe than most of the Turtles in terms of how he acts and everything of the series. And you've got all those characteristics very similar, but at the same time, you've got a problem when it comes to, April O'Neil. You go from making her this strong, independent female reporter to this strong semi-independent, because she is, only a teenager, so she can't be completely self-dependent, but, a teenage girl in the Nickelodeon series, and then you basically make her that, but, African-American, which, look, I've got no problem. It's not like April O'Neil is a white person name. You could argue maybe it's an Irish person's name, but, it's not like it's a white person's name. It's not like, or it's not like it's a black person's name either. It's not a racially tied name that you would associate with, a certain race or ethnicity. So, you know what? Hey, if you want to make the character a different skin color, especially in today's day and era, by all means. But at the same time, I'm expecting, decent characterization from this, girl, and her visual design it has nothing to do with her skin color, but her visual design, again, just doesn't really appeal to me much in the same way the Turtles doesn't appeal to me. It's too cartoony. It's too over-stylized. And that's really the problem, I think, with this, is that until the series actually comes out and we see some of the storytelling, it's going to be a lot of art and style over substance. And that is probably one of the biggest killers of cartoons or just any form where, the art is a big portion of what you're attempting to do, whether it's an animated film or any form, or a video game or any form of project, a comic, if your art is so good that it distracts from everything else, then it kind of makes you wonder, if you dig a little deeper, is there even really anything down there, deep down, to be had? And so, that's just my thoughts and my opinions on that. Of course, we'll have to wait until later this year for it to even come out. But until then, thank you for listening to the first ever edition of Comics Corner News, CCN. Hope you enjoy. Leave a like if you do, and of course, subscribe to the channel. And until then, this is Jason, the curator of comics, signing off.